Good afternoon, Director. Welcome to House Finance.
Thank you very much, Chairman Mello, and thank you to you and to the members of the committee.
Thank you.
With me is Patricia Coyne-Faig, known to many of you as our Chief Legal Counsel. She's been so for many years. She's currently acting as Assistant Director for Administration. And to my left is Brenda Broder, who is our Departmental Budget Administrator. And if there are legal questions that are beyond my ability to answer, I'll turn to Trish. If there are fiscal questions of a similar depth, I will turn to Brenda. But let me do my best to try to explain what this law, what this proposed change to the law is all about. We know times are lean, and the Corrections Department has attempted to do its part to be responsible with the taxpayers' dollars through reforms that were enacted by this General Assembly in 2008. We've succeeded in lowering the census at the ACI by some 15%. Meanwhile, incidentally, the rate of recidivism has also declined, and the rate of admissions has declined as well, suggesting that we have not created a crisis in public safety in the process. We have also brought down overtime. In fact, at this point, we're running almost 40,000 hours less than we did even last year. So there are, given the constitutional requirements imposed on us and the legal mandates that come with running a public safety agency, there isn't a lot left. This is something that we have offered, recognizing that every agency has to do its part. And the gist of it is as follows. The labor contracts with all the state employee unions, including the Brotherhood of Correctional Officers, expires, as you know, in June of this year. And this amendment to the law would set the stage for negotiations that, if they were successful, would yield contractual savings. We could not achieve those savings through negotiations, to your point, Representative Naughton, unless we change the law. However, changing the law simply opens the door to possible negotiation. And it works this way. Right now, there is a statute 28-12-4.3 that speaks to exemptions to the current law that governs minimum wage in Rhode Island. That law is modeled on the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act. Both of those laws recognize that when it comes to employees, one size does not fit all. There are certain categories of employees whose duties are such that they don't fit the standard work week model. Firefighters, police, rescue personnel often work in a time frame that is different and must be different than traditional employment. And corrections is similar in that respect. We're a 24/7 operation. We're staffed, must be staffed at all time. Any vacancies created through sick leave, vacations, military leave, and so forth must be filled. We can't simply abandon those posts without, obviously, significant risk to the public safety. In fact, we at times must impose mandatory involuntary overtime against the will of an individual staff member, because it's part of our obligation to the people of Rhode Island, and the Supreme Court of the state has upheld that right. Correctional officers are also subject to callback during times of emergency, and those occur in our department. So the point is that they are distinguished from what we would call the regular work hours of employees. They're more closely aligned with police, firefighters, rescue personnel. But the statute as it exists applies to those categories, but not to correctional officers. There's no exemption for correctional officers, and what we'd be asking you to do is to include correctional officers under that exemption as a way of setting the foundation for contract negotiations. There is a second statute that we proposed through Article 22 to repeal as well, and it's this, that it's a somewhat unusual statute, actually, 42-56-10, subsection 24. And it says that it was passed, I believe, in 2007, different economic times by the General Assembly. But it permits that a provision of the Brotherhood's contract, it applies only to correctional officers, this law, or members of the Brotherhood. It permits a contractual provision as interpreted by an arbitrator to supersede the laws of the state of Rhode Island. In other words, if an arbitrator rendered a decision that was in conflict with a law enacted by the General Assembly or presumably by another body, then the contractor's decision carries the day. It trumps and supersedes Rhode Island state law. And as I said, it's an unusual statute in that actually the Supreme Court of the state has already held that contracts entered into in contravention of a state statute are illegal. That was in 1881. Nonetheless, this law is on the books. And the reason we needed to include it here was because since a contractual provision that might otherwise violate a state law would still stand under this section, any efforts that might be made to negotiate the change in hours that we're describing would, if it led to a decision of an arbitrator, ultimately thwart the very purpose of trying to save this money.
Director, I don't mean to cut you off, but just a question, and maybe
Sure.
this is for legal counsel, but if we're talking about a law that says that the contract can supersede the law, isn't it the law? So what I'm trying to say is there is a statute that says that a particular contract, well, if it's a statute, then it's law.
Right.
So then therefore it's not superseding any law because the law states that it can do that.
I would defer to Chief Legal Counsel, but offer this observation that I think that you are correct in the sense that it becomes sort of circular.
No, and it does, but I'm just
you are
saying
correct in
that
that
there
if
is a
this-
law that states that.
Right. If this law remains on the books and the arbitrator rules on a different provision of the law, then this law permits that arbitrator to trump other provisions of the law because it still stands as a statute. I realize this becomes a complicated argument, and it does lead to a certain circularity.
Right, and I understand that, but what I'm trying to, and I'm trying to understand this as much as anyone, but it only allows collective bargaining agreements. So what I'm trying to get at is, if the Brotherhood and the administration, if you would, comes to an agreement, and that agreement happens to supersede a state law, there is a law that says we can do that, or that you can do that, rather, not us, but you can do that.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
therefore, if it's an agreement, then both parties agreed.
I think we're talking about cases where we don't come to common ground and an arbitrator ends up rendering the decision. And that if we come to common ground and enter into an agreement, so be it, success all around. Our experience has been that we have not, the state has not successfully settled a contract dispute with the Brotherhood since 1994. So almost all of those, since 1994, all of those contractual negotiations have failed and led to arbitration.
Are they binding arbitration?
Since, I don't remember when we entered into binding arbitration, but the General Assembly did pass a statute that said that as to the collective bargaining agreement and wages, it is binding, and I think that was in around 2005.
So the General Assembly in 2005 approximately passed it where it says it was binding arbitration.
Yes.
So both parties agreed to the arbitration. So
That I
kind
think
of-
that
I'm just trying to get to
Sure.
the point that from what I see, it's still an agreement because both parties agreed to arbitration. You go to arbitration, and now it turns out to be an agreement.